Riot Chapter 12. Brian? Brian heard Chelsea's voice, warmly familiar, but he didn't turn around. He could sense her moving toward him, coming from the hallway beyond the end of the counter. Her room must have been on the first one down the hall. Brian stopped. He couldn't face her yet. He could barely think, and then he turned around. Chelsea's face made him think of a bowl of perfectly ripe peaches. "So why are y'all here?" she asked. Glancing toward Kyle and the twins on the couches, she stepped a few inches closer and whispered, "Did you hear what happened?" Brian nodded. But why had he come? Why exactly? To see if she was okay? She was. To hear what happened? Maybe. To make him feel less guilty? He didn't know. "I was out biking and I saw police cars by your house." She folded her arms over her chest and clasped her elbows. "It looked like there was trouble," Brian said. She nodded. Then she spoke in a whisper. "Someone broke into our house while we were at school. Mom came home from her shift and found the beds ripped to shreds, furniture smashed. They even cut up family pictures." She glanced toward the ceiling. "They wrote swear words all over our walls. She picked me up from school so I wouldn't see it." She looked back at Brian with eyes that were completely trusting. "I'm so scared. Dad says it's enough that we have to put up with the high rent, $1,000 a month, just to stay there." $1,000? Were locals charging that much to live in those tiny houses? Chelsea continued. "And then to have it destroyed." Brian wanted to reach over and touch her shoulder, the same as he would if it was one of the twins got hurt, but he didn't. Her chin twitched. "Cam was doing so well," she continued, "and now he isn't talking again." "What do you mean isn't talking?" "He's different," she explained. "Learning anything has always been hard for him. He didn't learn to tie his own shoes until he was 8. He makes progress. It's just a lot slower than normal, whatever that is. Anyway, moving around every year hasn't helped. He makes a little progress and then slips again." She crossed her arms tighter. "This attack is really hard on him." Tears shaped at the edges of her gold-flecked eyes. Then her face crumpled. She pressed her hands to her mouth, turned quickly away, and ran down the hall. The woman with the wire glasses watched her and then glared at Brian. "Young man," she said, scowling, "I think it's time for you to leave." Brian chomped into a cob of corn at dinner table. "Hey, Bri," Dad said in his deep voice filled with raw energy. Brian glanced at Dad and found he couldn't look him squarely in the eyes. "I read your letter to the editor in tonight's paper. Nice job." He pushed his fist into the air and saluted Brian with the thumbs up. But the way he gave him the thumbs up without smiling with such force made Brian want to shrink away. Sometimes Dad pushed too hard. Brian was glad that corn kernels were wedged in his teeth so he didn't have to answer. Brian remembered the Hawks game when Dad, red-faced, had shouted into Brian's helmet, "Get out of here, Bri! Dominate the game!" Brian had gone for the puck and forced his way into the middle of 3 Hawks, and then had suddenly felt the slam of a hockey stick to his knee, felt himself going down under a dozen slashing blades. He'd ended up on the ice in a fetal position crying until Dad helped him off the ice. Brian had hardly dominated the game that time. Maybe writing the letter to the paper hadn't been such a great idea. Was Chelsea reading it right now? What would she think? He had thought he understood everything so clearly before he met her and Cam, before he understood that rats were just people like him. Mom passed the plate of ham steaks to Brian. "I love corn on the cob," Alyssa said. "Could we have a few kernels and plant them in the garden, and then we could grow our own corn next summer?" "Sure, Alyssa," Mom replied. "We'll have to get some dry seeds, but that's a terrific idea, honey." "Dad," asked Josh, "are we really going to have a party at the Holiday Inn?" Brian kicked Josh under the table. He mentioned anything about Chelsea, he'd be dead. "Well," Mom answered for him, "it just depends. Maybe we should think about a party at home this year. Wait and see." She looked at Dad. "Stan," she said, "I heard at school today that Marcia Finney's husband got a new job. You know how long he's been looking?" "No," Dad replied. "Most of the year. He couldn't find anything. Going on Marcia's paychecks alone, and you know those teacher aides don't earn enough to support a family." Mom looked at her plate and paused. "Stan, he got a job with Baguette," she spoke firmly. Dad didn't look up. Mom inhaled deeply and continued. "Seems there are quite a few people from town who are getting hired by them. The pay's not as good as with the union, of course, but it's not so bad." Brian looked at Mom, then Dad, to see if World War III was about to start. He didn't say a word. Dad's mouth was full. He chewed and chewed and chewed. "Well, my point is," Mom said, setting her fork carefully down on her plate, as if it might break, "it's not just out-of-town people who are working for them. Things aren't quite so black and white anymore. You know what I mean?" Dad finished his ham. He ate his corn. Through the rest of dinner, he just stared at his plate. The silence was like steel, cold and impenetrable. When Dad's plate was empty, he pushed his chair back from the table, walked out of the kitchen door to the garage, and started his truck. The engine's rumble filtered into the dining room. Mom pressed her fingers to her temples. Her diamond ring caught the light from the overhead brass chandelier. I didn't want to make him upset, she said, looking at Brian, but he needs to see both sides. Both sides. Brian understood exactly what she meant. He knew what his dad felt, and he knew what Chelsea felt, and he just didn't know how he felt. Numb. Maybe that was the word. Suddenly the door from the garage flew open. Dad stood there wild-eyed. The truck grumbled behind him. I almost forgot. Tomorrow, he warned. Don't go anywhere. Stay home. Mom looked up. Stan, she said, rising from her chair, but he was already gone. The door slamming after him. Truck exhaust wafted into the dining room. Mom grabbed the door handle. Stan, you can't just tell us to stay home without any explanations. Stan, wait. Brian looked through the white living room shears to the street. Dad's truck backed up into the road and then raced toward town. The truck's rumbling grew faint. Mom stepped inside. She closed the door softly behind her and leaned against it. Mom, does that mean we can watch cartoons all day tomorrow? Alyssa asked. Her face was eager. All day? Yeah, can we? Josh echoed. No, Mom said, her voice distant, as if it were coming from far away. Certainly not. Brian's chin twitched. His nose tingled. He looked away from Mom and stared out the window. Why would Dad come back inside to tell them to stay home tomorrow? A Saturday. Didn't make any sense. Wasn't Dad going to be around? And why should they stay home? On Saturdays, Mom always went grocery shopping, and when Dad couldn't fish, Brian and Kyle always got together. Something made him think of Chelsea at the hotel, scared, afraid to go back to her rental house, afraid of her brother. Maybe Brian should warn her. But about what? Hi, this is Brian Grant. My dad said to stay home tomorrow, and I just thought, well, you should probably stay put too. Right, that would sound completely logical to Chelsea. Still, though he couldn't put his finger on it, he knew deep in his own gut. Fear. He almost considered calling the sheriff. But about what? To say he was afraid of not only Chelsea, but for himself? For Dad? For the whole town? Thinking of Chelsea, he went downstairs, where the twins were plopped like wet noodles in their purple beanbag chairs. Hey guys, Brian said, taking a video down from the shelf. Here's one terrific show. He inserted it into the video player. Bri, cried Josh, you can't. We were here first. Kyle's voice came over the speaker, executed with tremendous skill. Brian watched himself on the television screen at the edge of the diving board, arms out, glancing toward shore. He started teetering. Josh and Alyssa laughed. Alyssa pointed. You're going to fall. That's okay if they laugh, Brian thought. Chelsea came next, and he loved everything about her, especially her hair and her muscular calves and the way she entered the water with barely a splash. She was perfect, or at least pretty close. Who knows what she thought of him?